Welcome to the Creating Positive Connections in the Workplace webinar. This webinar will provide an insightful overview of key areas of the brain involved in decision making and relationship building. You will learn how to recognize the neurological and biological effects of stress and how to intervene in such a way that builds resiliency. My name is Robyn Short, and I'm the founder and CEO of Workplace Peace Institute. Inside the organization, I work as an organization systems design consultant, a racial equity consultant, as well as a mediator and peace building trainer. The Workplace Peace Institute is an organizational systems design and research firm that brings a holistic and multidisciplinary approach to organization development. We support small to mid-sized businesses in optimizing employee engagement, maximizing organizational productivity, and improving profitability by infusing human security and dignity as foundational attributes of their business model. Peace exists in the workplace when all people experience human security and dignity. Human security is the actualization of basic human needs, and dignity is experiencing one's worth and value in the workplace. And we're going to talk a lot about both of those in this webinar. I love this quote from Desmond Tutu. Peace in its most fundamental form is the connection of one human spirit to another. And in the workplace, we absolutely need to be connected to one another. We need to feel trust, we need to feel bonding and loyalty, and we need a culture that perpetuates these positive connections. Cultivating positive connections is the work of honoring basic human needs. Basic human needs and dignity needs are the foundation of positive connections in the workplace. In this graphic, I have the essential elements of dignity as the core of this illustration. Essential elements of dignity are inclusion. All people need to feel a sense of belonging and ownership and the ability to contribute into their community in a way that honors the fullness of who they are. We all need acknowledgement for the value of the contributions that we bring into the workplace, and we need to be recognized for those contributions. We need to experience fairness and impartiality, and we need to know that we are being given the benefit of the doubt, and we need to extend the benefit of the doubt to others. We need understanding, and there's an inherent desire to be able to work independently and autonomously. From a basic human needs perspective, we all need to experience justice. And justice exists in the workplace when all people have access to the resources and the relationships they need to thrive and experience their potential. We all need physical and psychological safety, and we need security, meaning we need access to the resources that will ensure and perpetuate that sense of physical and psychological safety. We need belonging. We need to know that we have ownership of the community that we contribute to, and that community is going to contribute back to us as individuals. We need to experience love, and from the definition of love that I'd like for you to think about as it relates to basic human needs is the willing of the good of another and the expectation that that goodness will be returned to you. We need to experience self-esteem and personal fulfillment. Another basic human need that's critical is that we have the ability to participate. Cultivating a participatory culture is crucial to cultivating positive connections in the workplace. We all need cultural security, freedom, and to have our identity honored. These really lay the foundation of cultivating positive connections in the workplace, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about each of these throughout this presentation. Cultivating a foundation of positive connections is an exercise of both the heart and the mind. So let's get started talking a little bit about the brain and what's happening in the brain as it relates to the relationships that we're experiencing in the workplace. So there's three key areas of the brain that are of particular importance when we think about cultivating positive connections. One is the frontal lobe. This is often thought of as the CEO or the executive center of the brain. The frontal lobe is the area of the brain that is fully developed last. So when you hear people say that the brain isn't fully developed until around the ages of somewhere between 24 and 28, it's the frontal lobe that we're talking about. And this is the executive center of the brain. It's where advanced thinking and decision making takes place. It's where logic and reasoning occurs. It's where complex problem solving takes place. So it's obviously really critical to the workplace environment. The amygdala is the oldest area of the brain, and it's centered in the limbic system, which is the emotional area of the brain. And the amygdala's primary responsibility is to keep you safe. So it is attuned to any perceived or real threat. And what's interesting about the amygdala is that it evolved during a time period in human evolution where the physical environment was very dangerous, where we had to literally keep ourselves safe from predators, competing animals, that kind of thing. Um, and so its primary function is to serve as an alert system. When something is perceived to be dangerous, it produces the hormone adrenaline and cortisol, which infuses throughout your system and gives you the energetic resources to either fight, flee, or sometimes freeze. Now, what's interesting about the amygdala is that it doesn't differentiate between a real or a perceived threat. And it doesn't differentiate between a physical threat and a psychological threat. So when there's a violation of a basic human need or when there's a violation of a dignity need, the amygdala gets alerted and it sends this adrenaline into the system and says, you need to fight, you need to flee, you're not safe. So it's critical to those of us who want to take responsibility for cultivating positive connections in the workplace that we are communicating with our colleagues and building culture in such a way that we aren't activating that amygdala, where we're keeping people in a psychologically safe space. The other thing that's interesting about the amygdala is that when it's alerted, the frontal lobe I don't want to say the frontal lobe goes offline, but the frontal lobe no longer is the most activated center of the brain. Meaning, when the amygdala is activated and your body has gone into a survival kind of mode where you don't think that you're safe, you aren't making the very best decisions. You aren't necessarily problem solving effectively. You might not feel like you're in your right mind. It's why we say things we wish we hadn't said, and it's why we struggle to come up with the right things to say when we're feeling angry or fearful or shocked in some way. The other area of the brain that's really important is the hypothalamus. And this is really the epicenter of positive connections. The hypothalamus is responsible for, it is inside the hypothalamus where the chemical oxytocin is mediated. And oxytocin is the chemical that assists humans in creating strong connections, bond, trust, loyalty. It is really core to how we connect and build community with one another. So interestingly, when the hypothalamus is activated and oxytocin is being produced, it doesn't interfere with frontal lobe activity. It actually can support frontal lobe activity. So it's important that we are intentional about behaving in such a way that we don't get people's amygdala hijacked, and that we're behaving in such a way that we're actually cultivating the production of oxytocin in the workplace so that we can build those strong and trusting relationships. We're going to talk more about this over the next few slides. So it's really obvious that it's important that we manage our emotions. That doesn't mean that we don't have emotions or that we hide our emotions, but rather that we are in control of our emotions and that we're able to recognize what's happening internally and that we can regulate them. So behaviorally, there are some tactics that we can deploy for mitigating an amygdala hijack. One is simply knowing what gets you triggered. So if any one of those basic human needs or dignity needs are violated, that may cause you to experience an amygdala hijack, or it may cause you to feel as though you're not safe in some way or that your dignity has been violated. So it's important to be familiar with those basic human needs and dignity needs and know which one of them are most apt to cause you to have a response. We all respond differently to each of those basic human needs and dignity needs, so know which ones are most resonant for you and be able to prepare in advance for how you will manage, how you will seek out those needs in any given circumstance. Another thing that you can do when you experience amygdala hijack is quite literally just breathe. Infusing your system, infusing your body with oxygen will calm your amygdala down and re-engage your frontal lobe. So just breathing and oxygenating your system is going to calm your amygdala down. But to add to that is if you count and breathe rhythmically. So I like to breathe in on a count of 4 and exhale on a count of 4. And that activity of breathing and counting is even more effective because counting is frontal lobe activity. And the more that you're engaging that frontal lobe, the more resources that are going in that direction, the more your amygdala will begin to calm down and you'll feel your body de-escalating. Another thing you can do is actually physically move. So when you're feeling your emotions getting really engaged and you can tell that your amygdala is getting activated, simply saying, hey, can we take a break and take a walk, move your body, get the oxygen and the blood flowing to all areas of your body. That's going to calm your amygdala down. Be able to name your emotions. So interestingly, emotions and feelings are different. Emotions are biological and they can be measured. And psychologists agree that there are about 7 emotions that are universal to all humans. And those are happiness, joy, love, surprise, disgust, anger, and sadness. So all people feel those emotions. And when we have those emotions, we have a physiological and biological response to them. That's measurable. Our feelings are the way that those emotions are manifested. So we may feel worried, we may feel anxiety, we may feel angst, we may feel grief, we may feel weary, suspicious. There's a long list of feelings that might be manifested as a result of a particular emotion. It's important to be able to name your feeling so that you can identify the emotion and then vet it with yourself. Am I unsafe? What am I fearful of? What am I feeling disgust about? What am I feeling sadness about? So you want to be able to get beneath those feelings and really identify the emotion. And doing that is going to help you de-escalate and calm your amygdala and re-engage your frontal lobe. Put pen to paper. So just the act of actually writing something down on paper is frontal lobe activity. So that's going to calm your amygdala down and re-engage your frontal lobe. Taking that to the next step, I like to write down the values that I live my life by, the values that are really important to me, so that when I feel myself getting triggered and I take pen to paper, I begin to write down those values that represent how I want to show up and who I want to be in this moment. And it helps me center myself and it helps me to show up with integrity as it relates to my own core values. And then practice a regular mindfulness practice. So people who have a regular meditation practice, a regular yoga practice, walking can be a form of meditation. Any kind of intentional daily mindfulness practice will help you regulate your emotions on an ongoing basis. There's also things that we can do behaviorally to mediate the hypothalamus engagement, meaning we can do things to intentionally produce oxytocin in our system. And one is knowing what affirms you. So going back to those basic human needs and dignity needs, which of those particularly resonate with you? Which of those help you to feel seen, heard, and recognized? Know them so that you can be intentional about seeking that out. Increase your feelings vocabulary. Again, you want to be able to name how you're feeling, especially when your basic human needs are being met. So affirmed, joyful, gleeful, content, motivated, encouraged. Be able to name those feelings that you experience when your emotions of joy and love and happiness are present. Become familiar with those basic human needs and dignity needs so that you can actively seek them out and name them, and ask for what you need. And again, implement a regular mindfulness practice. There's a lot of really great apps available that can assist you in a daily mindfulness practice. So, the positive connections communication framework is a wonderful way to self express in such a way that you're honest and that you cultivate empathy and that you lay the groundwork foundationally for cultivating positive connections. And this positive connections framework was created by Marshall Rosenberg. He calls it the nonviolent communication framework. I really encourage you to check out his book, Nonviolent Communication, A Language for Life by Marshall Rosenberg. And it is what appears to be a simple 4-step process, but it takes a lot of practice. So I encourage you to download these slides and to keep this one in front of you. Print it and keep it in front of you so that you can use it to practice. The first step is state what you have observed or heard without judging or evaluating it. So simply, what did I see? What did I hear? That sounds really easy and straightforward, but our brain has this way of short-circuiting in order to get to like a shortcut for something. So let's say I'm late to a meeting 3 times last week. What we tend to do is, instead of say Robyn was late to the meeting 3 times last week, we'll say Robyn was so rude for not coming on time. Now I've evaluated Robyn's behavior. I've judged Robyn's behavior. From the perspective of this framework, we just want to state exactly what happened. Robyn was late 3 times. Identify how that made you feel in response. So Robyn was late to the meeting 3 times last week and I felt frustrated. Step 3 is identify and name the need that's under that feeling. So I really encourage you to go back to the basic human needs and dignity needs and identify at a deep level, what need do you have? So you might say, well, I just need Robyn to be on time so that we can get work done. But underneath that, there's probably a stronger need that looks something like justice or belonging or security. So I encourage you to really explore the need at the basic human need level and then make a request. So Robyn, I noticed that you were Robyn, I noticed that you were late to the meeting 3 times last week. That made me feel really frustrated because I need for everyone on this team to experience full participation. Do you mind sharing with me what's driving this behavior? So now I've self-expressed. I've done so in a way that invites curiosity, it invites compassion, it invites mutual problem solving, and importantly, it's not put Robyn on the defense. So Robyn's able to lean in and have a learning conversation. So let's look at a couple more examples. Observation. When we have our virtual meetings, I've noticed that you sometimes do not have your video or audio on. I feel disconnected from you and sometimes I feel frustrated. I need your expertise and engagement in our meetings. So the basic human need for participation, personal fulfillment, and belonging are all being met. The request, do you mind turning your video on when we meet? Another example, last week you were late to our meeting 3 times. I felt anxious because I need to manage time effectively for all our team members. So the basic human need for participation and justice is what showed up here. Can you share with me what's causing this behavior so that we can find solutions together? So all of these examples that I have shared with you so far are examples of when a basic human need is not being met. But we can also use this framework to express affirming behavior, to express emotions that are being, basic human needs that are being met. So an example, a colleague of mine was recently accepted into a PhD program. So I sent her flowers to congratulate her. And she called me and she said, I received the flowers you sent. I felt so seen and heard. So her basic need for belonging, identity, and self-fulfillment were met. And then she thanked me. Thank you for the acknowledgement and the recognition. And this affirming language helped me to know that I had honored her dignity, that I had honored her basic human needs. And we're going to talk in a few minutes about why that's so important and about what's happening from a neuroscience perspective when this type of affirming communication takes place. But before we do that, I want us to look at how we can use this same framework as an exercise of reframing. So obviously you're going to leave this webinar and now you know about positive connections communication framework, but the rest of your colleagues are not likely going to know about this. So let's say they come into your office or they come into your space, they call you, you're in a virtual meeting, and they self-express in a way that feels toxic or confrontational or defensive. You can use this framework to help build positive connections by reframing. So this is a more advanced skill, and I encourage you to focus on the self-expression first and then move into the reframing. But when you're ready, here's what that looks like. First, you state what you're hearing or observing without judging it. Then hypothesize how the other person feels. So make a guess about how you think they're feeling. Then hypothesize about what you think they need. You might be right, you might be wrong, but by making those guesses, you've invited them into the conversation. Then help them make a request. So what does that look like? I've noticed in our one-on-ones that sometimes when I offer performance feedback, you're not looking directly into your camera, and instead you seem to be multitasking. I wonder if the feedback I'm offering makes you feel anxious. Would it be helpful to share with me what you're feeling and needing from these moments? So by using this as an opportunity to reframe back what you're seeing or hearing from the other person, you're inviting them to lean in with vulnerability. You're inviting them to have a compassionate and curious problem-solving conversation. And importantly, you're not getting their amygdala activated. You're keeping that frontal lobe engaged, and you're also creating opportunities for hypothalamus activity, for oxytocin to be produced. So let's take a look at one more example. You've interrupted me a few times during our meeting. I'm wondering if you're frustrated with my approach to the project and need to contribute more directly. Would you like to share your thoughts? So instead of putting them on the defense, being accusatory in your language, you're inviting compassion and curiosity and mutual problem solving, where you can both learn about one another and about yourselves in the process. And in doing so, lay that groundwork for positive connections. So honoring dignity connects our heart. A core requirement of experiencing dignity in the workplace is having one's voice genuinely heard and the experience of having one's authentic self fully embraced and honored. The positive communications framework that we just reviewed invites authenticity, honesty, and empathy. And from our own research, what I have found is that the single most important factor of cultivating positive connections in the workplace is creating an environment in which all voices are heard. So we're going to look at how we can do that. How can we create this environment that embraces and invites all voices? Honoring dignity engages our hypothalamus, creating a burst of the chemical oxytocin. And remember, oxytocin is the hormone that causes us to create positive connections, develop trust, bond, and experience loyalty with one another. It's essentially an empathy binding agent. So dignity is our inherent worth and value as a human being. All people are born with dignity. It's a birthright. Respect is something that we earn. Dignity is something that we're born with. But we aren't always treated with dignity. Our dignity isn't always honored. And it's really critical that we focus on truly honoring the inherent worth and value of all people in our workplace. When we do this, we experience a positive connection. So I want to talk a little bit about some research that Barbara Fredrickson did. And she shared this research in a book called Love 2.0. And she talks about love as a chemical event. It's a chemical event that happens in your body, and it produces as a ripple effect a relationship that is foundationally built in positive connections. So love is the momentary upwelling of three tightly woven events. First, it's the sharing of one or more positive emotions between you and another person. Second, it's the synchrony between you and the other person's biochemistry and behaviors. In other words, it's feeling emotionally connected. And third, it's a reflected motive to invest in each other's well-being that brings mutual care. So this chemical action, this chemical response in the body that is love, produces chemicals, produces like a biochemistry that actually syncs us with one another and causes us to want to pour into the other, causes us to want to invest in the well-being. And we're going to really break this down because this is really the architecture of creating positive connections in the workplace. So this graphic here shows the pathway, the neuroscience of positivity resonance. So Barbara Fredrickson refers to this pathway as love. But for those people who are not fully ready to talk about love in the workplace, the word positivity resonance is synonymous with that. So love, positivity resonance, same thing. I personally would like to encourage all of us to really think about integrating the word love into the workplace, because love is what connects us. Love is one of the 7 universal emotions, and it is an emotion that is pro-social. It's an emotion that brings us together, and really, it's the emotion of beautiful creativity and innovation. So sharing of a positive emotion, that sharing of a positive emotion is the result of honoring dignity and honoring basic human needs. So when we honor basic human needs, when we honor dignity, there is a positive emotion that shows up: joy, happiness, love. Those emotions produce a burst of oxytocin. Oxytocin causes us to feel connected to one another. It causes us to bond with one another, and it causes us to build trust with one another. In doing that, we begin to sync our biochemistry. We're going to talk more about that in the next few slides. That syncing of biochemistry causes another burst of oxytocin. So there's an increased level of trust and connection and loyalty and bonding that takes place. That leads us to wanting to invest in the well-being of that person that we're engaging with. That investment, or I like to think of it as pouring into the other person, causes another burst of oxytocin. So there becomes this perpetual state of bonding with each other, a perpetual state of trust building, a perpetual state of connection. And that perpetual state of bonding connection creates trust. And that trust becomes perpetual, and positive connections result from that. So we're going to break this down into more detail in each slide. So when we're intentional about honoring dignity needs in the workplace, basic human needs are met. And I'm going to say that again because it's really important. When we're intentional about honoring dignity needs, meaning honoring identity, honoring inclusion, honoring acknowledgement, recognition, fairness, benefit of the doubt, understanding, independence, and accountability. When each of those are honored, basic human needs are met. This elicits positive emotions such as joy, happiness, contentment, and motivation. And we get that first burst of oxytocin. So in my research here at the Workplace Institute, what I found is that when dignity needs are honored, these are the basic human needs that are met. So participants above and beyond said that self-esteem is met. When their dignity needs are honored, self-esteem is met. Belonging is met, personal fulfillment, and so is freedom, security, love, participation. So all of these basic human needs are met as a result of their dignity being honored in the workplace. So there's 10 essential elements of dignity, but these 5 really surfaced in our research as what we call the dignity superstars. So acceptance of identity, psychological safety, acknowledgement, fairness and benefit of the doubt, are the core dignity needs that I really encourage you to focus on with your colleagues in the workplace. So, acceptance of identity. This is embracing those elements that truly define a person. So, if you ask someone, tell me about yourself, really listen to the stories they tell. Really listen to where that story begins. So, if a person says, oh gosh, I love reading books, or they tell you about their pets, or they tell you about their spouse, or they tell you about their parents, that's a big clue that this is a core piece of their identity. Accepting someone's identity requires that we're really genuinely listening. We're listening to who they are at the deepest level. Another important part of acceptance of identity has to do with the full embracing and acceptance of people who do not sit inside of white, heteronormative, cisgender dominant culture. That's kind of a mouthful. So if you have coworkers who are LGBTQ, it's really important that you honor their identity in the exact same way that you would anyone else. Ask about their spouse, ask about their children, ask about their, if someone's recently had a wedding, talk about their wedding. Really honor that identity and fully accept and embrace them. With your colleagues of color, it's incredibly important that there's not an expectation that they assimilate into white normative culture. Embrace and honor their identity by honoring and encouraging and accepting colloquialisms from their community, from various hairstyles, clothing, however people need to show up and be their full and authentic self. It's critical for acceptance of identity. Psychological safety is creating the space for people to present their ideas and thoughts without fear of humiliation or retribution. We also need to create opportunities for people to work autonomously and independently. People have a deep desire for autonomy and independence, but they need to have the psychological safety to know that they can be autonomous and independent, and that they can do so without fear of humiliation or retribution. It's critical that we give people the benefit of the doubt. Assume good intent, and importantly, extend trust without that trust being earned. So what we found in our research, and this seems obvious, but I think it's important, is that the very act of requiring that you earn trust makes you untrustworthy. So if you're the sort of person that only trusts people when they have earned it from you, you can bet they probably don't trust you. So it's a very reciprocal kind of relationship. Extend trust and you'll receive trust in return. Fairness is operating equitably and with impartiality. And then acknowledgement is the fifth dignity superstar that surfaced in our research. And what's really critical about acknowledgement is that you're providing really targeted feedback for people as it relates to their contributions in the workplace. What we found is that people who are young in their career, meaning that they are in their first year, 2, 3 years out of college, or first 2 or 3 years into the workforce, they feel affirmed and acknowledged by any kind of feedback. So a great job, well done, high five, feels very acknowledging. But not too long after that 2 or 3 years into their career, they need very targeted feedback. That general high-level feedback begins to feel inauthentic. So what that targeted feedback does is it shows to the person you're paying attention, you see me as an individual, and you're invested in my well-being and my professional and personal development. So really focus on giving people targeted feedback and frequent affirmations for their individual contributions as well as their team contributions. So I want to talk a little bit about the syncing of biochemistry. So we talked about the basic human needs. When dignity needs are honored, basic human needs are honored, that produces the positive emotions of joy, motivation, happiness. That produces this burst of oxytocin. That burst of oxytocin then leads us to be biochemically, leads to this biochemical synchrony. So I want to talk a little bit about brain science to help you understand this. So neurons are the cells responsible for receiving sensory input from the external world, for sending motor commands to our muscles, and for transforming and relaying the electrical signals at every step in between. So neurons are cells that hold information, and they move together in the brain until they connect. And at this point of connection, a neurotransmitter creates this little burst, and it binds the two neurons together. It binds the pathway together. And that's how we get sensory input from the external world. It's where we begin to understand and send information throughout our system, through our muscles, etc. So neurons are really, really critical to the way that we communicate and understand the world around us. Mirror neurons are a neuron that fires both when a person acts and when a person observes the same action performed by another. So this is really interesting. The neuron is actually mirroring the behavior of another person as though it were the observer itself. So if you think about when you see another person yawn and it causes you to yawn, that's mirror neuron activity. When you see someone experience joy and you feel a surge of joy, that's mirror neuron activity. When you see somebody crying and experiencing grief, you have that same feeling of grief. That is mirror neuron activity. So you can see that proximity matters when it comes to mirror neurons. You don't have to be physically present in the same room, but you will have more mirror neuron activity when you are physically present. So you want to be sure, to the degree that you can, that you have proximity to your coworkers, that you're physically present. So when you think about leadership teams that sit up in the ivory tower on the 5th floor and they never come down to be with those people in the organization, that lack of proximity is interfering with their ability to have this biochemical synchrony. It's interfering with their actual ability to build positive connections in the workplace. Leaders need to be physically present with the people that they lead. The next thing, so when we have this mirror neuron activity and this burst of oxytocin is produced as a result of that, we have an innate desire to begin to invest in the well-being of each other. So I want to kind of stop for a second and revisit this. When we honor dignity, basic human needs are met. A positive emotion surfaces as a result of that. Oxytocin is produced, which creates a desire, it creates connection, trust, and bonding, which leads us to have a biochemical syncing, which produces oxytocin, which creates more bonding, more connection, more loyalty, which leads us to want to pour into one another. It leads us to want to invest in each other's well-being. So how do we do that? Well, we talked about proximity matters. So when we are in a team environment, in a workplace environment, to the degree that we can, we want to do work together. We want to be able to collaborate. And when we have our meetings, it's important to start with an emotional check-in. How are you feeling really? Culturally, here in the United States, we say, hey, how are you doing? All the time. And it's not an invitation to really share how you're feeling. And we all know that. So we say, hey, I'm good. How are you? It's just a way of saying hello. It's really critical that we really actually do an emotional check-in with each other. Begin that process of connecting emotionally, because you can see with everything you've learned how critical it is that we actually have that biosyncing activity. We talked about proximity mattering, so in person is best. And if you're working in a virtual team environment, turn your camera on. You need to be able to see the people that you're collaborating with. There's so much information that is transferred through our facial expressions and through our body language. And we need to be able to see one another to fully communicate and connect. So in the virtual world that many of us are living in, I really encourage you to turn your camera on. I even encourage people that I'm working with, if I'm in meetings of 10 people or less, to keep your microphone on. There is more information that gets transferred when we can actually hear some of those small affirming noises that we make when people are talking. Now, it's not always possible that we have our microphone on, but to the degree that you can, I encourage you to do so. Use your time together to get feedback on joint projects. Use this to get feedback on how you can improve. So checking in with colleagues should be opportunities for mutual growth and development. And when you get feedback, act on it. I also encourage you to send notes of encouragement, gratitude, acknowledgement, and recognition. And while email is good, handwritten is better. And handwritten is better for a couple of reasons. When we actually write with our hands, we're activating a different area of the brain and a more emotive area of the brain. So more vulnerability and authenticity is going to come through a handwritten note. The other thing a handwritten note does is it says, I took time. I took time to really dedicate to thanking you. It's tangible, it's something people can hold, and it makes people feel very appreciated. So be thoughtful about how you can encourage one another, how you can express gratitude for one another, and how you can be really specific and targeted in the acknowledgement and recognition that you provide to one another. It takes time, but it is some of the best time that you'll spend in terms of cultivating a culture of positive connections. So I want to just bring this back into full summary and conclusion for you. Honoring dignity is the pathway to helping basic human needs be met. When our dignity is honored and our basic human needs are met, there is a positive emotion that results from that. That positive emotion creates a burst of oxytocin, which produces connection, trust, bonding, and loyalty, which causes us to actually sync up at a biochemical level. That mirror neuron activity creates a burst of oxytocin, which infuses more bonding and loyalty and connection, which causes us to want to pour into one another and invest in each other's well-being. It causes us to put our words into action, which produces another burst of oxytocin. And we create a perpetual state of bonding, loyalty, and connection, which is the foundation to producing a high trusting team. And that high trusting team is the birthplace of positive connections. So when we lean in to the fullness of who we are and what has brought us together, and when we invite wholeness and dignity into the workplace, we experience the very best of ourselves. We experience the very best of who we are, and we experience the very best in our colleagues. So I encourage you to visit our website, Workplace Peace Institute, to learn more about what we do, to access more resources, webinars, and research, and possibly attend some of our future webinars. And feel free to reach out to us in the comments section below and let us know what you think about this webinar. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of your afternoon with us.